welcome J. Warner Wallace.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Well, I'm really glad to be here with you. I was here a few weeks ago for the soul-searching video we watched on a Friday night, and I'm really glad to be back tonight. This is a season, isn't it, when you think about the resurrection and people are talking about it and preaching on it. Let's get started. I want to talk tonight about something, a skill set I think really is transferable. Look, this is what cold case guys do. First, we investigate things from the distant past. Let's go ahead and show them the list here. Chuck, let's go ahead and do one more. Okay, these are events that occurred 30 years ago. Most of my cases are like 79 to 81, right in that range. So they're about 30 years old. And, one more, Chuck, we're looking at stuff for which there's not really much evidence available. After all, if the evidence was really good, it would not be cold. It'd be cleared, right? Somebody would have solved it 30 years ago. So we're looking at evidence that falls in these two categories. Chuck, do me one more real quick. No living eyewitnesses, one more, Chuck, and not much forensic evidence that's available to us. And that's really the challenge. And this is the nature of studying cold cases. So Chuck, give me one more. I can tell this is going to be really difficult if we don't have a way to advance the slides. One more. But we do have a really convincing circumstantial case. The nature of circumstantial evidence is widely misunderstood. And a lot of times it's given a bad name. But all of my cases are circumstantial. I don't have any DNA evidence, fingerprint evidence, direct evidence, eyewitness testimony on any of my cases. And I don't think we've ever been in front of a jury more than about 2 hours to convict somebody. So you can make a compelling circumstantial case without having any direct evidence. Okay, we're going to talk about the difference between thank you. The difference between what's possible and what's reasonable. Everyone gets this confused. Look, you need to understand something. Possible? Well, anything is possible. Everything is possible. What's possible? We're not even here right now. We're all imagining this. It's possible that aliens abducted us and we're now on a ship under their mind control, and they've got all of us thinking that somehow we are experiencing this talk. And tomorrow morning we're going to wake up and find these people looking at us, and we're going to realize this has never even happened. Now, isn't that at least possible? Well, sure. But is it reasonable? No. Let's all do this. I think we're pretty much here right now. So we have to make a distinction between what's possible and what's reasonable. And in a court of law, this is really big, because we tell juries all the time, you're not allowed to kind of speculate, that's the word we use, speculate on what's possible. You're only allowed to infer, to consider what's reasonable in light of the evidence. So let me give you an example. I had a case years ago where a guy killed his wife for about $40,000 in his retirement that he didn't want her to get when they divorced. So he killed her. And the defense wanted to suggest maybe this was a burglar that had gone bad. Maybe this is actually a burglar who was in the space, and when she came home and she interrupted him, and the burglar killed her. Well, okay, time out. Do we have any evidence that there was a burglar? Is there any forced entry? Anything missing? Any sense there's a burglary in this house? No. Do we have any evidence that there's burglaries in the neighborhood? It's a bad neighborhood. These are common in this area. And no. Okay, jury, you're not allowed to speculate on that possibility because there's no evidence to make it reasonable. You're only allowed to think about what is the most reasonable inference from evidence that's offered to you. And that's the most important distinction I think we have to make when considering the resurrection. Remember, possible doesn't count. Reasonable is the only thing that counts. It's the judicial standard. It's the standard of proof, the SOP. What is that? Not beyond a possible doubt. If that was the case, we would never convict anybody. It's beyond a reasonable doubt. What is reasonable? We've got to ask ourselves, there's times when you're in a jury and you have doubts. There's times when you're considering the things of God and you have doubts. The question is, are these possible doubts or reasonable doubts? Are you holding on to these doubts because you have good evidence to support your doubt? Or is it, I just cannot believe, for example, in anything supernatural, period. I'm not going to go there. So you've already excluded the possibilities up front. Is that reasonable? It's certainly a possible doubt. The question is it a reasonable doubt? So that's the kind of thing we're going to talk about tonight. Okay, that's your one lesson in some rules, but now we have to teach you how to be a detective. Okay, so we're going to give you a crime scene. Now, are there young people in the room? Yes, there are a couple. So I'm sorry. We have to decide now how we determine what's reasonable, and the only way to do this is to investigate a crime scene, so get ready for something really gruesome. Are you ready? Sorry, if there's young people, this is the way it goes. We're going to start off with a dead guy. A dead guy in the room. So this is what homicide detectives usually do. We get called out to these death scenes all the time, right? And it's not as though these are necessarily homicides. Every homicide investigation begins as a simple death investigation, because just because you got a dead guy in the room does not mean that he's been killed by somebody, right? So let's see what the options are. I think there are some reasonable explanations, or some possible explanations rather, that we have to go through to determine which of these possible explanations is in fact the most reasonable. So what are the possibilities when you got a dead guy in the room? Heart attack, so a natural death, that's one kind of death, right? What else? Drugs. So that would be like an overdose? That would be considered an accidental death. Or if you did it intentionally, what would be considered? A suicide. Now we have three kinds of death, and what's the last one? Homicide. So we have four different kinds, and they look kind of like this. Natural death, and it could be an accidental death. You could trip and fall and somehow fell on something. Who knows? A suicide and a homicide. So let's take a look at our scene here right now and see if we can eliminate one of these possibilities given the evidence we have so far. So far we have a dead guy laying face down. Can we eliminate any of the four possibilities yet? No. I think they're all still on the table. We have to have some additional piece of evidence that would push us one way or the other. So let's go ahead and do that right now. Let's add an additional piece of evidence, all right? Let's say we didn't just have a dead guy on the ground, but instead we had a dead guy on the ground who's laying in a pool of his own blood. But the blood's not coming out of his head area, it's coming out of his stomach area. Now, given that this is the case, these are our possibilities. We've got a dead guy lying face down, and he's got a pool of blood coming around from about where his stomach is. Can I eliminate any of these possibilities now? Which one? Yeah, why would you say you can eliminate natural? Oh, dude, you are good. You are good. Good job. Yeah. I mean, if it was coming out of his head area, you might bleed out of your eye, but it might have some kind of an aneurysm, who knows, right? But you don't naturally bleed out of something in your stomach. There's no opening here to bleed out of. So I think we can eliminate natural death. Let's cross it out. But I think we're still stuck with the other three. So let's see if we can add another factor to this and see if we can change the scenario slightly. Here we go. Dead guy lying face down in a pool of blood. Oh, knife in his back. It's changed just slightly. So let's go ahead now and look back at our scenario. We've got a dead guy lying face down in a pool of blood with a knife in his back. What can we eliminate? Can we eliminate suicide? Hey, maybe he's creative. Maybe he decided to stab himself in the back. I mean, I'm with you. I think it's less reasonable than the others. But I think we could probably at least eliminate accidental. It'd be tricky to get this done accidentally, don't you think? So let's eliminate that one. Now, of course, we have to change the scenario just slightly. Let's go back to our dead guy laying face down. There he is. Now the question becomes, what should we add? How about multiple stab wounds? Now it's a little more obvious. We come back to our scenario here. We got this guy laying face down, knife in his back, pool of blood, but he's got multiple wounds. I think we can eliminate a lot now. But let's just be conservative. Do you think we have a homicide yet? What if he's just really got a high level of tolerance for pain and he's just ambitious? I mean, couldn't that be, I'm with you, I think it's not reasonable. Let's just add one more piece before we roll out suicide. You know for sure you would feel it was a homicide if you had this scenario, plus you had bloody footsteps leading away from the body. I think we'd be convinced then, right? So let's see what we're doing. We're looking at the evidence on one side. Now we have footsteps. And we're looking at the possible explanations on the other side. And we're saying, given this set of evidences, which of these possible explanations is the reasonable answer, right? And we would say, yeah, I think it looks like it's a homicide. And my son is a cop. He worked graveyard last night, so he's actually out in the parking lot sleeping. So when we get done here, we're all going to surround the car and wake him up. But he's the guy on the photograph, so he's not really dead. Okay, just so you can have some peace of mind about that. Now, I go through all this process with you because I wanted to teach you this thing. It's called abductive reasoning. That's what detectives do. They use abductive reasoning. You guys use it all the time also, whether you think about it or not. I had a detective partner who had young college-age, upper high school-age guys, and when they would come home at night, he would tell me he would wait up for them. And as soon as he came in through the door, he would give him a big kiss and a hug and say, "I'm so glad you're home safe," and he would go to bed. And I knew this guy, Dave. He lives out in Temecula. I said, come on, this doesn't sound like you. I know you're a jerk. Well, I can't imagine you waiting up for your kids to give them a hug and a kiss. He says, no, of course not. I want to smell them to see if I can smell alcohol. So as soon as they come in, I give them a big hug and a kiss. So he's using abductive reasoning. He's trying to collect evidence and then make the most reasonable inference based on the evidence he has, right? So we all do this, and that's what he was doing too. So now we're going to take this process of abductive reasoning and we're going to use it with the resurrection. That's why we took all this time to kind of discuss it. This is the actual process we're going to use. And we need to do it because the resurrection is the singular most important event in all of history. It is the cornerstone, Paul tells us, of our faith. If Christ has not been raised, then our preaching, Paul's preaching, Peter's preaching, John's preaching is all in vain. And your faith is also in vain. Moreover, we're found to be false witnesses. We've been lying to you because we've been testifying that he was raised bodily from the dead. And if that's not true, we are liars. And if that's a lie, then everything else in here, you can just get rid of it. It's all a lie. Why should you trust anything we've said if this most important thing we've said is not true? So it's important for us to see, is it true? We've got to test it. And we're going to test it using some facts that come out of some work that was done by Gary Habermas and Mike Licona in a book called The Case of the Resurrection of Jesus. Now, I didn't know anything about this book when I first started studying the resurrection. I don't think it had been written yet. But I did know there were some minimal facts that I would have considered to be the most important minimal facts. And that's what Habermas did. He surveyed all New Testament scholarship, from the most liberal scholar and skeptic to the most conservative Christian scholar. And he said, are there some certain minimal facts that everyone accepts about the resurrection? I came at it kind of a similar way. I said, hey, what's the least we can say with certainty? Forget about all the supernatural claims. I think there are a few claims we can point to. I think these 4 facts, in my opinion, are the least. They're the minimal thing we can say about the resurrection. I think we could say pretty convincingly that Jesus was crucified and buried. Does this mean he rose from the dead? No. Does this mean he did any of those miracles? No. He just got beat up and thrown on a cross and crucified. That's the only claim we're making here with that first one. It's pretty minimal, wouldn't you say? I think we could agree on that, and most scholarship would agree on that. And I have spent a lot of time as a skeptic looking at all the prior Jesus mythology, all the things I'll kind of throw at you, not compelled by any of that stuff. This is a minimal fact I think we could all live with. Also, the tomb is empty. Well, duh. If the tomb wasn't empty, we wouldn't be here talking about it. Someone would have drug his body out and said, hey, this is a lie. That's not a big-time claim, I don't think. It's a pretty minimal claim. Tomb is empty. He's been crucified and buried. And the disciples later on said they saw the risen Christ. Does that mean they actually saw him? No. But we know they said it. They wrote 4 Gospels about it. It's a pretty minimal claim, wouldn't you say? It's not really controversial. They clearly thought they saw him risen. And then 4, the disciples were changed by this. So much so that they all went to their death on the claim without recanting it. Very minimal claims. None of these mean that any of it was true, that he actually was resurrected from the dead. But these are the minimal claims they made. So let's take a look and see. What we need to do is say which of the possible explanations best makes sense of these 4 pieces of minimal evidence. And look how minimal these are. I could offer a few more. But this is the least, right? These 4 claims, I think we can make our case, given the possibilities that are available to us. So here are the possibilities. Let's take a look at these possibilities. Remember how we had natural death, accidental death? We're going to list every way that people have tried historically to explain the resurrection. Basically, they just said one of these 7 explanations has been offered in trying to explain the minimal facts. And most skeptics will fall in one of the first 6 categories. We, of course, hold the bottom one, right? We say, no, those Gospels are accurate. He really was raised from the dead. But all the first 6 are how the skeptical world around us. Now, I'm just going to knock through these real quick with you. And I think you'll see why I don't accept the first 6. Just looking at this thing from a perspective of a detective. The first one is this idea that they were wrong, that basically Jesus never died on that cross to begin with. Some people have called this the swoon theory. Muslims actually believe, for the most part, that somebody other than Jesus was put on the cross and was not either crucified completely or wasn't completely crucified, depending on who you talk to. And so we want to be able to look at this and say, hey, did Jesus actually die? Because maybe they were wrong about it. Remember what they're saying. This is the claim they made. And this is an interesting claim. Think about who wrote this claim. An eyewitness by the name of John. What was John's profession, by the way? Educated man? College graduate? No, John's a fisherman. Look at how he describes the crucifixion as a fisherman. Now remember, Luke was a doctor. If Luke describes the crucifixion a certain way, I would expect it to look a certain way. He's a doctor. But John's a fisherman. And John says, the soldiers therefore came and broke the legs of the first man who had been crucified with Jesus, and then those of the other. But when they came to Jesus and found that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. Instead, one of the soldiers pierced Jesus' side with a spear, bringing a sudden flow of blood and water. Interesting account, blood and water. Now, I've been to a lot of autopsies. I have to go every time someone gets killed. I have to go to the autopsy to figure out if if there's something, maybe a toxicology. Was there a drug involved? I got to bring back all the rounds. If he's been shot, I got to bring back every round. So I got to wait for him to dig the rounds out. All that kind of fun stuff, right? It's not a fun place to go. But I have learned a little bit about what happens to the body as just a cop that I think is important to share with you tonight. Look at this description that John offers here at the very bottom. He says that he saw blood and water come out of the body. That's really common when you see people go into shock, especially after a car accident. When you get on the scene and the person is about to die from the injuries in a car accident, usually before they die, they go into shock. And it's called circulatory shock. And it causes one of two conditions of effusion. There are two kinds of effusion. One is called pericardial effusion. It's the sac of the membrane around the heart fills with water. The other one, though, is known as pleural effusion, when the same kind of thing happens around the lung or in the lung itself. So if you're in cardiac shock, you're going to end up with one of these two conditions. So if someone was beaten badly before they were nailed to the cross, or perhaps just the nailing to the cross itself would cause this kind of shock. And if that's the case, I would expect to have either water around the heart or water in the lungs based on the kind of shock they're in. And it's interesting to me that John happens to tack it on the end of his description. John the fisherman tacks it on there. Now, it could really be that John was clever. And knowing the nature of pleural effusion, he decided, I'm going to insert this in my account now, because about 1,000 years from now or 2,000 years from now, when they discover this thing, they're going to go, wow, that's a good piece of evidence. But I don't think he did that. I think he just described what he saw. And at least it's consistent with what I see when I see guys go into shock or gals go into shock after a really severe injury. Now, I can tell you, as we look at this idea of the followers of Jesus taking him down off the cross, we typically read it like a sentence. And we read it like this. So as evening approached, Joseph of Arimathea, a prominent member of the council, bought some linen cloth, took down the body, wrapped it in a linen, and placed it in the tomb cut out of rock. See how fast I just said it? So we're describing a process in which these people came and bought some linen cloth, took down the body, wrapped it in the linen, and placed it in the tomb of rock. It didn't happen that fast, folks, as fast as I just said it. That process takes time to get him off the cross, to carry him to the tomb, to wrap him, to scent him with all the herbs and scents they would use when people die, and to place him in the tomb. How many hours did that take? I don't know. But it didn't take as fast as I read it. We have a tendency to read it that fast and say, okay, that's what they did. See, because it took time to do this, I have a sense that probably they would have noticed if Jesus was really dead, based on the kind of inconvenient truth of death. There are some really irritating things that happen when you die. This is the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office. It looks okay on the outside, and I'll show you what it's supposed to look like on the inside, although it never looks this way. See how clean that is? There's about 6 tables in the main room at the county coroner's office in Los Angeles, and it's a house of horrors. They basically hose it down in between autopsies. It's a disgusting place, and it smells terrible. There's a big sign on the wall that says, "No eating in the examination room." And I'm thinking, like, who needs to have that sign? Who wants to eat in here? But I'm not kidding you. There's these guys who are kind of like technicians that help the coroners. We call them Igors. They come in and they cut the heads open and take the brains out, and they cut the body and take all the organs out. And they do this all in preparation for the coroners, right? So one of these Igors who does all this, he just finishes all like 6 bodies in a row, and he sits on a stool, and he eats a sandwich. And I'm thinking, only here does this kind of thing happen, right? Because you get so desensitized to it. Well, there are some inconvenient truths about death, and there's 3 inconvenient truths that occur when your heart stops beating. And every dead guy I've ever come across has these three things happen pretty quickly, depending on where they are. First, you get cold. You lose your body temperature pretty quickly. And you get hard. Your body gets rigid. Up till about maybe 8 to 15 hours, then it begins to soften again. Right? Third is lividity. When your heart stops moving the blood in your body, it begins to pool and it bruises wherever gravity is the greatest on the body. If you're laying on your back's going to get purple. If you're laying on your face is going to get purple because your heart's not pumping blood anymore. So I want you to think for a second of this scene where Jesus is being carried off and handled for as long as he was handled. Do you really think that they wouldn't have noticed the three inconvenient truths about death? See, I don't think what's the first thing we do? And they've been doing it for thousands of years. When you come across a person you think is dead, what do? Check his pulse. You listen for breathing. So in all the time they're handling this body and the hours it took to prepare him for burial, we're supposed to believe they never noticed that he wasn't breathing, that he had no pulse, that he was getting cold, rigid, and bruised. I just have never seen that. I've been to a lot of death scenes. And there's a difference between a guy who's unconscious and a guy who's dead. If you've ever been to a death, you know this is the case. I look at this and I say, okay, this is an explanation that's been offered. He didn't really die. It's possible because anything is possible. I don't think it's reasonable because I don't think it adequately describes what they said they saw.